So in this presentation of the idea of the diagram, it will be explored in several different ways. Firstly, in a literal way, which opens out an abstract device in order to indicate what is invisible on the level of appearance. In the notebook and sketchbook, there is often a sense of multiple or hybrid depiction of things in the state of flux or becoming. There might be a feeling within this of an arena of potentiality and becoming, in which a combination of images, language, signs, symbols become subject to the schemas of otherness. Within modernity, this is a feeling for discontinuity within the frame of perception, which was explored by both collage, bricolage, and assemblage. The next level is a diagram with the esoteric tradition that exhibits traits which are outside the notions of pertaining to visual regimes of presence and emerge within modernity as a supporting condition of early modernity. The Eastern models of aesthetic presentation encode other forms of abstraction, which likewise embrace relationships to the invisible or the etheric. The etheric is the, as opposed to the gross physical body, the etheric is the subtle body. Finally, we have the explicit Deleuzian philosophical construction of diagrammatics, which is based on the disavowal representation. So in these notebooks, there's observations of nature, optical insights, diagrams, principles of mechanics, architectural sketches, anatomy, meditations on weather patterns that mix empirical reflection with abstract laws that govern appearance. So a kind of way of organizing the visual and the textual together, and the diagrammatic and the visual and the textual together. I'm going to decline transcription requests. The artist's note or drawing books are not in and of themselves manifestations of the diagrammatic in art, but that rather they open the possibility of it. And this is connected to the fact that they follow no rule pertaining to presentation, and this is like a formal rule that opens out the possibility of novel conjunctions within both the visual and figural planes. This is also related to the fact that they invariably close the schematic devices out of which more tangible modes of recognition might start to occur. Everything is in fact in the open, but it is the openness that rests upon no syntactical authority, demarking passage as opposed to final modes of synthesis. So a way of thinking about the different registers of the image and the text and the diagrammatic, which is already a kind of trait of abstraction, of thinking across registers. Isn't it? So the drawing by Leonardo. This was one of the first drawings of the interior of the body. So a mapping of what was then unseen and unknown. Extraordinary that it took several hundred years to affirm the accuracy of these drawings. It's Albert Dürer. So this sort of codification of the body and of proportion and the relationship between the gross physical and the diagrammatic. There's drawings of sketches of animals and landscapes. Doubtful whether you've seen all of these animals. I don't know if you went to see the Dürer exhibition at the National Gallery. I think it's just finished now. But he explores in this, particularly in this print of Melancholia, pictorial space composed of images, symbols, words, and signs. On one level, it anticipates collage as a mode of pictorial construction, and on the level of form, towards a kind of excess or a density in which different planes coexist or emerge in correlation. One of the greatest engravings, I think, in world culture. However we approach Dührer's engraving, whatever empirical or literary method we use to observe, catalogue, and describe its contents, we must cope with what the great German art historian Wolflen over a century ago called the chaos of objects, a visual disorder that beguiles, perplexes, and perhaps even irritates the gloom-filled space. No, not in a fine art context. This is Robert Flood, who's best known for his compilations on occult philosophy. He had celebrated exchange of views with Johann Kepler concerning scientific and hermetic approaches to knowledge. So at a time when the esoteric and the arcane, which was face to face with the scientific and the empirical, sort of a way of embodying the relationship, in this case, between human and celestial forces. Much of Flood's drawings and diagrams relate on the nature between man and the terrestrial earth and the divine. So a kind of relationship between the dark chaos and divine light, which acted from the chaos which finally brought forth the waters. This last element was also called the Spirit of the Lord, and made up the passive matter of all substances. So this kind of view of the world as a single substance in which there's a kind of frequency, a vibrational frequency between all different levels and all different registers. Complex way of divining reality. Then Robert Flood, early 17th century. So this is a time of the Enlightenment, the domination of Newtonian physics, but sort of very strong arcane esoteric culture as well, which contested this view of an empirical view of the universe, a materialist view. This you find running throughout esoteric diagrammatics, the relationship between the square, the circle, and the triangle, with the sun, the moon, the stars. Again, 17th century. So figural and diagrammatic are placed together in a ordered view of the. This is the botanist Grew revealed for the first time the inner structure and function of plants. From the anatomy of plants. Again, it's 17th century. This the period of the Enlightenment philosophy, which is predicated very much on the knowability of all things. So there's a kind of classification of the world, but a kind of relationship between inner and outer, and between the extent of the universe is opening out and the inner workings of it likewise. So we get this microcosmic exploration alongside macrocosmic exploration. This is the Timurid period. This is Topkapi's scroll, which shows this is Muslim abstraction of the 16th, 17th century. This is a Timurid. This is 15th century, 15th, 16th century. As opposed to being an image within a given frame of time, there is instead an animation of a loop of time in which actions pertaining to building work are drawn into a visual sequence. So it's not one moment in time, it's the multiple moments in time, all scrolled together to depict a kind of, in this instance, building work. So it's the whole loop of relationship between actions and becoming of a building, but not fixed in one place at one time. So a kind of diagrammatic relationship to reality, which is not fixed by predication on space and time being a priori intuitions of the real. This is Safavid, Safavid period, which follows the Safavid is Persian, early 17th century. This is a garden rug, so it's an image from above, depicting the relationship between flora, fauna, aquatic beasts. So it's a kind of, again, a diagram of which is heavenly and earthly at the same time. It's a silk carpet which had as many as 500 knots per square inch. This is Tibetan 14th century mandala. Mandala functions as cosmic diagrams in which different layers of reality are encoded into a single form. So all the directions of the earth, the great centers and forces that reside within the principle of reality. And the initiate can meditate upon that to realize the higher form of visual and aesthetic unity of the cosmic diagram. Vajrayogini mandala is this 18th century. The upward pointing diagram and the downward pointing diagram indicate the interpenetration of male and female forces, both abstracted and concrete. This is Jain religion is older than Buddhism, or about the same time. So it's the beginnings of a monotheistic religion. But again, a lot of their art was concerned with these diagrammatic encounters with the plane of, in this case, of mortals. Had a great relationship to abstract mathematics and geometry, the Jains. This is a diagram of the subtle body and chakras, or the etheric body. So you've got the gross physical body, which is muscles and bones and nerves and sinews. And you've got the esoteric or subtle body of the chakras and Nordic channels. There are 7 main Nordic centers, which go up the space of the spine, ascend from the sexual and anal centers of the body, the energetic centers, to the which is frequency of the color red, up into the space which is outside, 3/4 outside of the body. We've also got the manifestation of the vibrational frequencies of each chakra, which has a sound current and a color current and a figural form. So a complex meditation and yogic system to help the energy raise the kundal or the kundalini energy from the base of the spine to the the brain, and a kind of yoga is yoking the body to the cosmos. So these diagrams were instructional as much as they were objects of ascetic meditation. Zen, 18th century, or early 19th century, circle, square, triangle. Again, the sense of the origin or primal etheric starting point of the cosmos. So just moving on to the diagram in Deleuze. Diagram consists of one of the most distinctive discussions in Deleuze's idea of painting. He says the diagram is indeed a chaos, a catastrophe, but also a germ of order and rhythm. It is a violent chaos in relationship to the figurative givens, but it's a germ of a rhythm in relationship to the new order of painting. The diagram is not a signifying system. It's important to understand with Deleuze that he's against the idea that painting is a signifying system and is a system of representation, but rather it's a presentation, a coming into a becoming rather than a being. Rather, it exhibits manual traits or confused sensations such as lines, zones, marks, color patches. The diagram confronts the presence of chaos or a prior sense of history in order that a new type of reality can be created or emerge. And in this respect, the diagram destroys the prior representational qualities of figuration. Diagrams are not simply confined to artistic and aesthetic realms, but also ontological. Ontological is the order of being or becoming, because it embodies the will to art. The essential thing about the diagram is that it is made in order for something to emerge from it. And if nothing emerges from it, it fails. So one of his discussions of Bacon is this relationship to diagrammatic, the emergence out of chaos or catastrophe, this kind of contest between chaos and emergence of a rhythm, a new order of painting. And this is against, as I say, the idea of the representational order. Defies representation. It's beyond representation or before representation. And it releases a constant sense of becoming other than itself. It re-occasions itself through history and through temporality. Since Picasso's Pipe, Glass, Bottle and Rum, 1914. But again, this a new relationship to a visual order in which parts of the depicted realities could be the actual typography on the object of interest, and the punning of the object of interest through the diagrammatic re-representation of reality, a reconfiguration of spatial and temporal givens. So instead of the space and time being a priori or given, they are actively become material, part of the materialist depiction of reality, and a reconfiguration of into another order of space and time. So another dimension of space, notably the fourth dimension. So seeing an object simultaneously from above, below, and to the side, or a depiction of the multiplicity of connotations of the reality in question: a newspaper, a bottle, a pipe, a table. And connected to this new way of understanding the fourth dimension is also the esoteric way of understanding the fourth dimension, notably in Theosophy, which was related to Madame Blavatsky's writings. formed on the basis of Neoplatonism, occultist and esoteric trends within Christianity and Indian religions, following from the cultivated belief that there is an ancient and secret brotherhood with special powers. Overall philosophy teaches us that the universe can be perceived as the outward reflection of the universe. So again, these diagrammatic levels of the universe. Again, the diagrammatics of chakras, the red at the base of the spine, the white at the top of the spine. So a way of going through all the different planes of the body. In yogic theory, you have up to 7 different planes of the body: gross physical body, etheric body, mental body, spiritual body, astral body, and so forth. And one of the great books of this philosophy of theosophy was Thought Forms by Annie Besant and Leadbeater. They're closely influenced by Indian esoteric thinking related to chakras and subtle body. The illustrations of Thought Form gave reality to the sense that the realm of the invisible can be made manifest. And these, of course, had a great influence on Kandinsky. This idea of thought forms being manifested as visual forms or diagrams was at the root of his idea of abstraction. You can still get these being republished constantly, these publications, even though they're early 20th century, they have a lasting influence. This is just a page of they gave insight into the way in which the invisible realm, the esoteric realm, had a visual component and a diagrammatic component. And this is one of the insights into the idea of another dimension, or fourth dimension, a realm of abstract interpenetration of realms. So the diagram is the hidden dimension of the spatial encounter with difference. Then we had this extraordinary moment where the work of Hilda af Klint was exposed to a wider public. She didn't really show in her lifetime and wasn't part of the movement towards abstraction, but she predates Kandinsky by quite a number of years. She was influenced by Rudolf Steiner, and was at the sort of meeting point between pictorial abstraction and a kind of healing philosophy, esoteric healing. And a number of years ago, she showed these paintings. These paintings were shown at the Serpentine, but Steiner said to her that she wouldn't be shown for 30 years until after her death. In fact, it was close to 50 years. And of course, she did a whole number of notebooks which developed a symbolic system encoded in her work to offer a codex to the systems that form coherence of the whole. So it's a very systematic undertaking of the relation between the visual and the esoteric, and the dimensions of the fourth dimensions, the invisible dimensions. So these all came from a different direction from early modernist abstraction. They shared some of the inclinations of Malevich and Kandinsky, but they also had a separate philosophical basis. So she met Rudolf Steiner in 1908 and this was to result in a more systematic approach within her painting, often materialized in the form of cycles of work. This is the Mohammedan standpoint from 1920. So she drew things from esoteric religion. This is Carmen Veloda, who used to be at the Royal College in painting. The diagram maps the real yet to come by capturing and bringing into relation traits that do not yet mean anything, that signal their matter alone and capture what is most alive in sensations. At once a map of sensation, a map of difference, a map of relation, it reminds us of the nature of aesthetics as transformational, a dimension by which things become other than they are. This idea of a diagram maps the real yet to come, so it's a temporal, you have to understand it in a temporal way, a sort of becoming of something, never kind of quite resulting in finality. It's Kandinsky from 1912. Lend me your ears to music, open your eyes to painting and stop thinking. Just ask yourself whether the work has enabled you to walk about into the hitherto unknown world. If the answer is yes, what more do you want? How often do you get asked to stop thinking and to walk about into the other unknown world, hitherto unknown world? That was Kandinsky's advice. In his phase with the Bauhaus, where it becomes more coded in diagrammatic forms. Again, this is Kazimierz Malevich, Black Square from 1915. The diagram marks the moment when abstraction becomes real, the moment when abstraction of material traits is made into a new reality. This is Elazitsky, Prune. This is Rodchenko and his photo montage. So photo montage comes with this new way of understanding space and time and hidden dimensions, and it's a sort of unfixing of reality principle, a kind of against the mimetic principle of reality, against the idea of the real is rational and the rational is real, a kind of opening the floodgates of reality into new vectors and new orders of presentation, new sense of experiment and openness to the realms of the unknown and the unspeakable and the again, Rodchenko, construction number 95 from 1919. The 1917 was the Russian Revolution, but already underway was this revolution in pictorial language, a kind of a new convergence between the abstract realm and the figural realm and the diagrammatic realm and the political realm. This is the Marcel Duchamp network of stoppages, Paris, 1914. So you can see it's not just the end of mimetic art, it's the end of this single moment in space and time, this opening out of not just the a diagrammatic of reality, but a kind of diagrammatic of temporalities, a kind of new way of showing movement and process, and experiment with abstractions. And so you get a trace of the painterly in the background, but with the new reality of the diagrammatic imposing itself over that old reality of depiction. And the large glass was complemented by the production of a green box in 1934 in order that the reception of work was not purely visual. He constructed the large glass between 1915 and 23, and it was completed when it broke, accidentally broke. He accepted the law of chance. So again, it's a universe in which the male and female are rendered into figural depictions of, this coffee grinder, these abstract diagrams of geometries, and so the spatial encounter of the kind of frustration of the bachelor not being able to mount the male and female kind of in different orders of depiction. This is his green box. So it opened out a kind of new way of ordering the experiment of the visual. So all the separate elements are kind of, it's a coffee grinder. These are ciphers or flasks. This Picabia. So again, you get this meeting point between technological machines and esoteric machines. It's Picabia. With this, you find the interest again in different types of notebooks and different types of ways of being able to codify reality, as if everything was thrown into chaos is now beginning to return to an order, a new system of depiction, a new way of codifying the visual and the conceptual and the textual. Again, Paul Klee. This is Anthroposophy by Rudolf Steiner. Steiner recorded his views of the world in numerous books. He also gave more than 5,000 lectures in which he explained his ideas using only minimal notes. When he described especially difficult subjects, Steiner frequently resorted to illustrating what he was saying with colored chalk on a large blackboard. After his early lectures, drawings were erased and lost. But after the autumn of 1919, however, thick black paper was used to cover the blackboard so that the drawings could be rolled up and saved. These are the drawings. She used to say had an incredible and profound impact upon the work of Cy Twombly and Joseph Beuys. This is Borges, a writer. Did Rose try to dream of these things? Did he dream of them as they once occurred at the beginning of time? They are for sure far more astonishing than the demagogues or serpents and bulls that found in other cosmologies. So they're not classified as being aesthetic objects. They were complementary. They, in a sense, what can't be quite said, they kind of turned into diagrams, into gestures, into a meeting point between the diagram, the word, and the actual gestures contained within the lecture itself. So it's both a performance and an enactment. These were published as a book fairly recently when Joseph Beuys were doing his diagrams on blackboards. They were not quite understood as being so close to Steiner. 50 years, it preceded him by 50 years. Another undiscovered artist was Emma Kuntz, who lived in Switzerland and never had an exhibition in her lifetime. She was a healer who employed the pendulum as the primary means of reading the etheric starting point of illness. So she did these drawings under the guise of the pendulum, which did readings of the orientation and the vibrations of the body, so she could understand physical symptoms, how they emerged in the body. The form of medicine at that time, which depended upon frequencies and vibrations. The artists. These could be seen as the frequencies of a given psychological, physical, the meeting point between the physical and the psychological and the etheric realms. Another artist who did an immense amount of notebooks was Anton Artaud. When he was in asylum in the 1940s, he produced hundreds of notebooks, and they recorded he was deemed to be psychotic, but he had this vast. He was an actor and a poet, but he started to do these drawings and notebooks, which were outpourings of the psyche, of a sort of machinic, unconscious, if you like. Artaud's writing becomes a suspension of the present. Like a notebook, it is a blueprint for an apocalyptic form of expression that has yet to materialize, or, to use the expression which recurs in his work, is always not yet. This idea of the diagram being related to the coming to be, or the not yet, or the presentation of the of becoming, is persistent. It fills 406 notebooks. This is Joseph. Another figure is Joseph Cornell, who collected, stayed in New York all his life, but collected objects from which had this sort of feeling of the cosmic travels and journeys into the unknown and into a sort of poetic universe of conjunctions between objects and maps and objects of fascination. This is Gilles Deleuze in his book on Foucault. His book on Foucault is a brilliant exposition of the diagram. The diagram is no longer an auditory or visual archive, but a map, a cartography that is coextensive with the whole social field. This is an abstract machine. It is defined by its informal functions and matter, and in terms of a form which makes no distinction between content and expression, a discursive formation and a non-discursive formation. It is a machine that is almost blind and mute, even though it makes others see and speak. So this kind of meeting point between something which is closed down and almost impossible with something which is full of potential at the same time, a chaotic and sense of the emergence of something out of chaos, the emergence out of something which is blind and mute, making us to see and speak otherwise to what is logical. This Rosenkrantz on Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg was insisting upon what Rauschenberg was insisting upon was a model of art that was not involved in what you might call the cognitive moment, as in single image painting, but instead was tied to durée, to the kind of extended temporality that is involved in experience like memory, reflection, narration, proposition. So again, this idea of, instead of a single moment in time, a single space or reality, this sort of multiplicity, this diagrammatic multiplicity in which you've got extended duration. A little bit returning to what you find in Eastern painting, or particularly Persian painting, this multiple depiction of a temporal sequence or a passage through a landscape which has got multiple subject points of view. This is Leo Steinberg on Rauschenberg. The picture plane could be something like some garbled conflation of control systems and cityscapes, suggesting a ceaseless flow of urgent messages, stimulus and impediment. Rauschenberg's picture plane has become a surface to which anything reachable and thinkable could adhere. It had to be whatever a billboard or dashboard is, and everything a projection screen is, with further affinities for anything that is flat and worked over. It seems at times Rauschenberg's work surface stood for the mind itself, dump reservoir switching center, abundant with concrete references, freely associated with as in an internal monologue. The outward symbol of the mind as a running transformer of the external world, constantly ingesting incoming unprocessed data to be mapped in an overcharged field. It's interesting with Rauschenberg, he was deeply and profoundly dyslexic, and yet had this incredible intuitive grasp of relations between things. It was by him kind of what Steinberg called the garbled conflation of systems. His mind worked in that way. He was able to reassemble reality in a way which was complex and multifaceted and beyond simple literal translations of relations. This is Cy Twombly, Synopsis of a Battle from '68. Again, the influence of Steiner's blackboard. So some of these blackboard drawings or paintings are the most fascinating of Twombly's work. The kind of density of mark and inscription systems and temporalities, being on the move and being vibrational intensity to them, as you feel the rubbing out and the rubbing in and eliminations and extractions and although the handwriting has these swirls, loops and scrolls that don't actually form specific words, which leads us to the cusp of understanding and not allowing us to do so. So it puts us in between where the word forms and deforms at the same time. Since the marks resemble words but don't actually form them, this series of drawings would be influenced by his time in the army as a cryptologist, leading him into drawing scribbles that an audience cannot understand, like a code. It is said his blackboard drawings show the mark where knowledge and fantasy meet, therefore displaying the link between fact and fiction. He previously made it clear that his drawings were influenced by Leonardo's notebooks and drawings where the artist drew in order to learn, therefore showing the importance of the process of work rather than the final outcome. So I'm sure this kind of cares with a lot of your thinking. We can deal with that later. Again, Cy Twombly, Untitled from '68. Again, these waves and formations of becoming and this relationship and disintegration and formation in the loop. So nothing's clear, but everything is at the same time indicated. Again from '68. So this kind of incredible outpouring of psychological and bodily energy, this inscriptive process of both mind and physical gesture. The meeting point of the registration of the mind with the releasing of the bodily energetics. There's the Joseph Beuys and his blackboards that kind of always related to his lecture series and his performances within galleries. And again, Beuys refers back to Leonardo and Dürer because of the way they stand in relation between science and art, and this way of linking empirical investigation with esoteric understanding. Beuys was also fascinated by the teaching methods of the Bauhaus, in particular the use of diagrams by Paul Klee in the period after 1920. These models of cross-fertilization of disciplines and interrogation of traditions serve as a basis for his relationship to public speaking, and through this a distinct approach to diagrammatics. So he had this very close relationship to the philosophy of Steiner, but also the notebooks of Leonardo and Dürer and Paul Klee. It's one of his blackboard drawings. So he'd lecture for hours and do numerous sort of blackboard drawings as he did so. And he'd talk about any subject, his sort of encyclopedic relationship to ecology, to politics, to energetics, to esoteric disciplines of esoteric disciplines such as yoga and so the aesthetics sphere was open for him. It's open-ended. It could include anything. So here you can see his three folds of social order: body, soul, spirit, and this kind of way of codifying liberty, equality, fraternity, and free political economy. One of his drawings. So at once they're arcane and it's sort of, you could say, partly anti-modern. He's interested in Neolithic art, in cave paintings and anything which in a way reimagined the energetics of life forms. It's Agnes Martin, just a work called Words from '61. And this is another type of diagrammatics which appeared within conceptual art. This is Joseph Kosuth's 1 and 3 Chairs. It says from '65 it wasn't. It wasn't shown until 1969. He just insists that he had it in his head in '65, but materialized the work in '69. 1 and 3 Chairs, which is closely related to the work of Wittgenstein to do with like objects. Carmen Voloda again, and Tintoretto's difference. Diagrams have no form or substance of their own, rather they are purely operational. They function to construct a new reality. As such, diagrammatics involve a transcendental element beyond a given reality. Deleuze understands diagrams as maps of sensation rather than maps of form, that is, as maps which make something new of sensations. This is a quote from Robert Smithson. One's mind and earth are in constant state of erosion. Mental rivers wear away abstract banks. Brainwaves undermine cliffs of thought. Ideas can decompose into stones of none knowing. And conceptual crystallizations break apart the deposits of gritty reason. Fabulous writer. Really amazing way he understands the loop between mind and matter, between the deep time and time of modernity. I'll read it again. One's mind and the earth are in constant state of erosion. Mental rivers wear away abstract banks. Brainwaves undermine cliffs of thought. Ideas decompose into stones of none knowing, and conceptual crystallizations broke apart into the deposits of gritty reason. As if he grasped diagrammatics in that statement without the concept of diagrammatics. This is Mary Kelly postpartum document, which she, in bringing up a child and kind of both describing the breakthroughs in language and gesture, and so kind of constructed a way of being with the child, but through systems of knowledge and through description and through abstraction, Lacanian diagrams, and so sort of textual, inscriptive system to understand the process of coming to be of a child, the process of growing up and acquiring language. It's an example of broccolage, Maren Mertz. Broccolage relates to the idea of construction from a diverse range of things and materials that have starting points in disorder that in turn might become to indicate a new and novel unifying gesture. Sigmar Polka, again, this sort of relationship to broccolage, sort of multiple tracings from different sources of reality, mass culture and painterly systems and other inscriptive processes, all colliding into a kind of chaos of visual, almost at the point between melting back into chaos and emerging into an order. Derrida, Jacques Derrida, stressed the idea that text might be composed of hinges, breaks, or crevices, which imply probing the text below its surface. This implies text have an underside in which a network of sense are formed in ways that intersect the surface of the text. at a time when post-structuralism was grasping that texts might have these physical hinges and breaks and crevices and doors opening and closing, and there's a sort of underground to text. There's an overground and underground. So there's a physical. The text has a physical quality. It's dry or moist. It's got hinges. It's got turning points. It's like an architectural model. This is Bill Woodrow from the early 80s, when there was a return to figuration in painting and sculpture. He took things off the street and reconfigured the embedded imagery in it. So car door, ironing board, and twin tub with the North American headdress. This reconfiguration of reality into a fantasy, into a remote conjunction of realms. This is still from Jean-Luc Godard's History de Cinema. She wrote, it's kind of like a series of essays on the history of cinema and confronting the death of cinema, the death of the coming of the digital and the loss of the indexical. Jean-Michel Basquiat, this bird on money. So kind of he was influenced by very much by Leonardo's note. He was ill in bed and he looked at a lot of Leonardo's drawings and notebooks, and also obviously graffiti, and so it kind of mixed up a reality of inscription of diagrams and words and histories, and so again it's to do with the page. It's not to do with the picture. It's not to do with the history of painting. It's more to do with the history of the notebook made into painting. Very much in keeping with this idea of Deleuze, of this play between order and chaos, they introduce a new non-signifying sensory order. The recent exhibition on just off Court Street of fascinating drawings of, again, this relationship to the notebook. Joseph Antonio Suarez. This is the Atlas Group, and from 2000, these combine works of depictions of the Lebanese war in Lebanon, both the fictional and both the meeting point between the fictional and the real. So actual documentation with imagined, imaginary fictional group. There's an artist called Julian Simmons. These what's called Oberclair drawings in 2015. This is in the Gallery Lychee 1. These drawings were pencil drawings, but done with a rotational machine, kind of very much like different mandalas. This is the Inca, the endless Istanbul endless house project. Again, this kind of multiple materials that using the floor and the wall, so kind of see themselves not as an installation artist or as a sculptor, but rather a painter still. So it exercises the sensibility of painting, but with found materials and found objects and inscriptive systems. This is artist Harris Epimonda, who's also at the Royal College. He does these assemblages of whole rooms full of objects and stands, and often parts which are hidden. So the whole space becomes the actual artwork exists as a spatial encounter between things, not the things themselves. And the installation art of Harris Epimonda was Greek Cypriot. We're presented with a whole series of objects, images, and constructions in spatial configurations that might decompose as much as compose sense. There is a play of absence and presence, relations born out of disjunction or striation, as much as smooth passage. Just as the space functions as a diagrammatic medium through which visibility becomes manifest. Julia Mesuratu. Again, this sort of diagrammatic system of marcation and demarcation and inscription, closer to a mapping again of reality, and no fixed temporality to it. So before, after, and the future, the becoming are fused together. Sort of mobile system of inscription. Another RCA recent graduate, Vivian Zhang, 2019, showed recently the Hayward painting exhibition. But a new relationship between virtual and actual, and between abstract and figural. There's no fixed relationship between the abstract and figural, between the virtual and they each kind of collide and coalesce and commingle. So you get traits of different levels of reality, as if the virtual is interweaving its way into the actual, and the actual into the virtual. So a kind of new sense of abstraction. It's not an abstraction based upon the loss of the figuration. It's the figural and the abstract demarcation, the decorative and the painterly all mixed together. So a double dislocation of abstract and figural traits in which actual and virtual becomes folds within a heterogeneous gestalt. The gestalt is a visible diagram of figure-ground relationship that manifests as a warping of space. This is nothing in common with formless abstraction and with this the aesthetics of purity or sublimation. So a new sense of abstraction, the abstract machine is something to be, rather than given, is to be created, becoming of an abstract machine that's not given, it's discovered. So again, Deleuze, in his book on Francis Bacon, the diagrammatic or abstract machine does not function to represent even something real, but rather constructs a real that is yet to come, a new type of reality. So this, again, this sense of always it as a becoming, a kind of construction which isn't given, but is to be created, is to be reconfigured. Finally, work by Kung-Hwa Shun, Walk with Eyes Closed from 2019. But again, this sort of sense of this virtuality and the diagrammatic virtuality and this figuration as the yet to come. That's it. A bit of a long haul. But I wanted to cover the main aspects of the diagram, both actually a kind of a kind of literal diagram with the abstract idea of diagrammatics, a kind of meeting point of a new reality. Are there any questions or thoughts or speculations or senses in which it touches upon your own studio work or and one of the things about this series is that I'm moving towards a theory of not just post-modernity, but and not just post-contemporary, but a kind of new cultural reality, a rupture with the present, which has been taking place over the last 4 or 5 years, and not yet clearly manifesting, but is to become. So it changes the way in which maybe you think about the realities of aesthetic conjunction with reality.
I was thinking it was really interesting to think about intelligibility. Like when you talked about Cy Twombly's approach to the drawing, diagramming, and thinking about Leonardo, and also thinking about the kind of more esoteric kind of diagrams in relation to kind of Deleuze as well, like just this kind of difference in terms of thinking about intelligibility, like how it is, what it is diagramming and what it's trying to show and how it's trying to show it. So the Deleuze, I was thinking it's like a diagram that sort of bypasses the intellect and like gets to you directly. It sort of gets to your intelligence, an internal intelligence that you haven't been able to articulate, maybe. But then there's this difference with the diagram that's kind of outlining a kind of conceptual framing. But then this possibility of the two sort of coalescing at some point, maybe now, I don't know, somehow those two, this kind of affective understanding and a kind of understanding the world through a conceptual framework. But I was thinking it's to do with maybe materialism, like a perspective on materialism that kind of goes beyond this attempt to objectifies everything and sort of like bringing in this idea of a kind of cosmology or mythology that sort of links together the kind of inside and outside, and understanding this kind of process relationship with the world rather than a kind of understanding from our perspective on top of it, if that makes sense.
Well, of course, Deleuze is against the representational configuration of aesthetics. He says that art deals with affects, it does something, whereas philosophy deals with concepts. But he also says that philosophy is a kind of configures itself as an image of thought, which militates against thinking very often. So he's got a very radical critique of philosophy as well. He doesn't take the givens. And he says about the social, he says that what we require is not more ways of understanding, but silences through which, in a way, thought can begin to cohere in new ways. So it's very much against the givenness of the conceptual realm. he kind of tends to think we over privilege it. So it's against Cartesian thinking, where is a line of thinking which is deeply opposed to Cartesian dualism. And it's very much with this idea that the world is a single substance, and that we need to reconfigure this way of understanding reality as immanent and as a becoming rather than a representation, and as a series of fixed identities. So we're dealing with the explosion of realms at the moment, dealing with technological overdetermination, and we're dealing with a kind of a sense that the aesthetic is devalued within that, and this is government policy in very very simple terms. They're not financing aesthetic, not thinking, aesthetic way of manifesting the world. Privileging the technological over that. And the language is creeping in of, when people evoke method and the technology, they're often evoking the irrational and the instrumental and the modular and they're turning it into something which is got qualification, and that shouldn't get me onto that. Any thoughts about how the work is cracking up in terms of distinct ways of understanding category, and how it's merging into other arenas of knowledge or ways of seeing, or
it's an observation. I have a feeling that, as you explained, Deleuze, it's very, very related to Eastern philosophies. And then there is that thing about esoteric knowledge. I have a feeling that esoteric knowledge is maybe a Western view on what Eastern philosophies deal with. And there is also a sort of, it isn't obviously treated or dealt with in Western philosophies. But
well, first of all, there's the history of, let's say, the relationship between Greek knowledge and Chinese and Indian knowledge, and there's much more mobility between the different realms of philosophy than what we imagine. Indeed, a lot of Leonardo's technological drawings are said to have come from Ming China. And the Egyptian world was far more, it's the esoteric underpinnings, much touched other cultures much more self-evidently. And we underestimate the movement between worlds in the pre-modern period. We tend to think of modernity and colonization as when the world became joined up, and we get an image of kind of globalism emerging, but each formation had distinct knowledge formations, but these formations merged with other formations and gave rise to interesting conjunctions. So all I do in these lectures is try and open out the different systems of thinking, different systems of making manifest, and sort of slightly undermine the privileging of modernity over other cultures. I mean, Japanese architecture of the 16th, 17th century has manifestation of materiality, which is in advance of a lot of modernist architecture. Chinese Ming furniture is unsurpassed in modernist furniture. We need to open out just the visual realm and historical realms for a greater sense of comparative relationships without privileging, without we forget too much too easily.
Jonathan, could you touch a little bit on Deleuze and his writings on Francis Bacon and how he applied the diagram? And because I assume that's different than, let's say, the way he talked about Foucault and the panopticon and a diagram in that fashion.
I mean, it was later, and it's more like a series of seminars that he did. They're not really that sort of polished. And it's interesting when he met Bacon in Paris, and when they met, they virtually couldn't speak to each other. They were both intimidated by the other and kind of were babbling at each other rather than having any interesting exchange. But he served to reconfigure Bacon. I mean, he gave Bacon with his writings on Bacon, he opened out a new way of talking about art, which was had a particular anti-conceptual feeling to it. So he turned the tide against conceptual figuration of art and towards the affective encounter with art and the acognitive. It's sort of like a way of being with Bacon rather than an exposition from the outside of Bacon. It's a kind of feeling about traits and about processes. So he was concerned with Bacon's process of painting, where he found an image and would lose an image and find it again through a kind of movement from the chaotic into a kind of image and back again into a chaos. I mean, in that Bacon exhibition, it's interesting, in his early work, he is trying to discover an image through paint. He doesn't know what the image is. He kind of has different starting points, and he paints into the image. And whereas in the later work, which is I describe as mannerist, he knew he was painting a Francis Bacon. He knew the traits. And I find them a bit deadening, the late triptychs on the whole. Whereas the early work, I think there's a sort of actual struggle for the image, not knowing what the image is and not knowing what a Francis Bacon is yet. And there's also his relationship to the decorative comes through in that exhibition. They're quite there's something very sweet about it. It's both abject and sweet at the same time. So it's a mixture of economies. It's quite paradoxical that he has a very decorative feeling of paint, thin washes with coagulated blobs of paint, and very tasteful, and yet at the same time persistently abject and obsessive and striated. So it's two different languages coming together. And I think that Deleuze was sort of trying to find a language for that, and he was willing to experiment with a kind of form of writing which was open-ended and suggestive rather than prescriptive and fixed. So he asks the question, what would it be like for a philosopher to engage with a painter? And the book on and Bacon is the answer or the process by which he could be a philosopher who abandons philosophy for the sensation of painting, or abandons himself to the sensations of painting rather than to the realm of concepts. So he organizes the text in terms of distinct things like diagrams and sensation, and he has a preoccupation with chaos and order, but he wants to explain the becoming of a painting, the temporal way whereby it becomes a work of art rather than as a way of becoming a representation. Or so he takes to Bacon because his life's chaotic, his manner is chaotic, yet a new rhythm, a new order, a germ of something different emerges from it.
I hope it's not too much of a digression, but how would Deleuze on Bacon differ from, let's say, Lyotard on Barnett Newman?
Deleuze was quite close to Lyotard. They're different. They often occupied similar realms of discussion. He wasn't obsessed, but not obsessed, wasn't preoccupied with the idea of the sublime, whereas Lyotard was, and he had a different reading of Kant. So both Lyotard and Deleuze did books on Kant, but they differed in terms of their relationship to the sublime, I think, and the beyond of representation. So Lyotard reconfigured Kant in a different way to what Deleuze did. He's much more interested in also temporality, and there's an interesting thing in the book on Kant where he opens out temporality in another way. So his book on cinema is emergent in his early book on Kant. He kind of has an insight, an intuition about time, and about he rethinks Kant. So Kant is both a friend and an enemy. He calls him the enemy of the North. So he's both an enemy and a friend of Kant. He's in accord with Kant in that Kant stands for the beautiful is acognitive, aconceptual. He stands by the idea of the judgment of taste, as distinct from his third critique is distinctly different from his first critique. Is in accord with that, but he departs from Kant in many other ways, because his dualistic Kant is to do with the subjective turn in knowledge, how the subject comes to know, how the subject comes to feel. Is not for him. It's too dualistic. It's too division of mind and body, and too dualistic in terms of categories. But I'd say that Lyotard and Deleuze are quite close, but they differ in their reading of Kant. That's not really an answer. You have to go into Kant and Deleuze and Lyotard in relationship to what they wrote.
Well, thank you, though.
The difference is the theory of the sublime.
I have a question.
Both are anti-representational. Both stand for the art is not a representational system. So they're in accord in that sense. Victor, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question if what your thoughts on are like, you spoke often about like new forms of behavior. I mean, like often a lot of what we do is like it's based on the behaviors. So like stepping into what would be like a new aesthetic realm, or it would necessitate like it would need a new form of behavior. So I was like,
I think that's where the revolution is. I mean, in the minor sense.
Yeah, I know, but
we
like
start to behave differently.
my question was a bit like more specific in that, because like, how long have you been here at the RCA now? 30 years, 20 years?
Since 90s, since mid-90s.
Mid-90s, so nearly 30 years. And it's, what would you say are like the distinguishing traits of finding those behaviors that are unique? Because you've been here for so long. I'm sure there's like, I mean, you see it in some artists, like we're talking about Bacon, for example, but I don't know, do you notice from all your time here, like a way of looking at things or a way of doing things that leads to new openings in like, instead of just going down the same alleys? Like, are there, or is it just an always change of behavior? Like, there are no.
Well, there's traits of behavior which are always constant. But the main trait is confidence. If you don't have confidence, then it doesn't happen for you. And so you've got to change behavior in that sense. You've got to operate in a way which is to open doors which are not been opened before. And to open a door which has not been opened before, you've got to have confidence to turn the handle on this really banal and a sort of experiment of risking everything for an experiment, and not being too prescriptive, not being too bound by the institution, having a reality outside of the institution, knowing that the reality is stronger outside of the institution than it is within the institution. And the other trait I've learned is that in different ways, students who become successful are very smart. They study things very carefully. They take intellectual issues seriously, but not necessarily pedantically. They again experiment with modes of thinking and behaving and being with materials, and they network in a very sharp way. They build up a network of people who have not necessarily conflicting, but not necessarily harmonious views upon reality, but they work off each other to produce a new reality. So they experiment in reality, and very they have a sort of charm to them. I mean, I'm 70 now, so I can say those sort of things. So they attract. So the confidence is an attractive trait. Openness is an attractive trait. Before you start dealing with materials, you've got to attract. You attract the right things to you, the right other beings and other materials come to you. And it's magical. It's not systematic. You can't teach it. So this is why I'm against the modular system. Is that it's beyond judgment. A certain kind of patience as well. An ability to understand it might take you 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It doesn't come necessarily automatically. You've got to work for your time. Your time is not always guaranteed. So it takes guts. But just a way of being with materials and being with other people, and in a non-specified manner, in a way which is experimental on those different planes. And looking at everything openly, looking at art from different, not obvious, like too much attention is given to recent art. Not enough at, you might suddenly find something in something which was produced in the Neolithic period. You can't simulate it, but you can find some reality in it, which is has a conjunction with the present. The reality principle is crazy at the moment. It's the most complex mess that has ever been presented.
What do you mean by reality principle? Like, how you define reality principle? Like, I know kind of what you mean. How would you define reality principle? It's like our current conditions of
conditions of economics and distributions and
on a
ways
wide
of being, and just we're mind beings. We're not. The machine knows more than we do about ourselves. And art is a resistance to that, but it's hard to understand resistance in the present. But I'd say that diagrammatics is a conjunction of materialities and memories and histories and ways of understanding what we don't know. I mean, as the universe expands, we know less than what we did previous moment. But we just have to place ourselves in bow before rocks, as it were, because they know more than we do about deep time. So what the present revolution is a new configuration of time and space, very abstract things, which will bring about different laws of attraction. And but the Sekig is interesting just simply because it's got a configuration of the realm of ethics. It relates to the eruption of freedom, and that freedom is not given from the outside; it emerges from the inside and coheres on the outside. It's the opposite of what it's presented as, which is, a state says we give our citizens freedom. Well, they don't give anything. As soon as someone says that, they're taking it from you.
Jonathan, can I ask, have you always worked in your practice? Have you worked a lot with sketchbooks and with that sort of processing notation that we've looked at tonight? Because I have to say that's somewhere where I've lived in my practice probably almost right throughout everything I've done. And I always find that that's the most exciting part for me. And you've shown me tonight that how important it is how other artists have translated out of that space into a bigger space, not just a sketchbook or processing of ideas, but to continue that conversation into the work. Whereas I've always almost treated it like an arrival process, to sort of, that's the processing part, and then I arrive.
Yeah. It's a different temporal mindset.
Totally, and
so once you get that difference, it just opens the space for you. It's not pre-given space. It's not. I can't tell you what it looks like. But it'll feel like it's different, and it'll give you conjunctions which are different, and confidences and attractions which are different. That's all.
Yeah, and just to be able to play in that space with different, as you've shown us, different techniques, different materials, different ways of bringing that together, so that the conversation is continuing.
It's subtle. It's so subtle that you can't get it through. Someone can't point out how to do it, but you suddenly just switch and you get it. And then that opens out the difference of the space of encounter.
definitely, because it's always felt so easy to keep that they're sort of jumping between temporalities, historical and current, and processing what you're thinking and sketching and that possibility. It's always seems so easy to keep that alive on the page in a sketchbook. But then, yeah, you've shown me tonight that it's possible then to.
It's like the moment of abstraction in European art. They seem to get it simultaneously without instrumentality. No one told them how to do it. Just arrived. The conjunction with theories of the scientific fourth dimension, the esoteric fourth dimension, the anti-mimetic space. Just in one go, it all came together, and different solutions were found to the visual. Different mappings, different diagrams of the visual were discovered.
Brilliant.
And next two lectures on, I think it's on errancy and eroticism. Errancy is important in terms of aesthetic processes. Getting it wrong to get it right, we could say. Experiment opens out something which isn't given. Method opens out something which is can be secured and reproduced as the self-same. So errancy is the fly in the ointment of the method.
To simplify what Deleuze said about the diagram, or to try to understand it better, would it be accurate to say that basically the diagram is a structure which allows you to see what is, it describes it and it allows you to see it, but ultimately you have to drop it, because if it's the description, then it will never be the thing, and in order to fully understand the thing, you have to become it. So
yes, a simple transfer of it's the registration of the chaotic and the form, so the process, and it's also the impossibility of understanding at one point the relationship between the present and the future. So it's a conjunction of material processes with temporal switches. So it's the overcoming of the chaotic, but with the anticipation of the yet to come, through the anticipation of the yet to come. So it's the switching point between material presence and temporal becoming. So it's as if you're doing two things at the same time, or more than two things at the same time, probably.
Sorry, so does that almost translate as like thinking by doing, roughly?
On the simple level, you can't, you don't, when you do, you don't think so much. So you don't do and then think about it. You erase a certain process of thinking through doing, and arrive at a different point outside of thought or outside of representation. Thinking is a valve. It's a valve of extraction. It reduces the field of encounter. There's too much information in reality. It reduces that down. You'd go mad if you took in every particle of information that's thrown at you. It's a reducing valve, subtraction. It's not an additive machine as we think of it. Thinking is a censorship machine. Doing opens us to the field of immanence, if you're Deleuzian. Opens us to the elsewhere of thinking, of representation. That's the surprise of art. When art becomes habitual, no longer surprises, it's becoming methodological. It's becoming reproducing itself as a self-same. It's probably too much inside thought. What do I do next? It's instrumental. So it's constantly, the reason Deleuze is interesting, the diagrammatic, is because it's always a kind of confrontation with the chaotic, the not knowing. If you knew it, you wouldn't be in chaos. So it's that early modernist thing of the role of the dice. So the fourth dimension didn't just open out the idea of another dimension. It opened out the operation of chance, of throwing the dice. That's why Mallarmé, the poet Mallarmé, is an important figure in modernity. Kind of conceived of the aesthetic operation as throwing the dice, which is taken up later on by thinkers like Cage. Anyone who hasn't spoken? I'm always interested in what's happening behind these abstract names. What kind of faciality and what sort of thoughts are going round, and what kind of frustrations or eventually over the period of 16 lectures, you'll all speak, I think, at some point, or wish to speak at some point, or all know that speaking at some point opens out some possibility. It's sort of, you attract another thinker, or you attract another person. It could be just facially you attract, or just with your manner of speaking. So what attracts you to listen to these? Someone who hasn't spoken.
Hi, John. Do you want to? Sorry, the reason I'm often not speaking is because I'm literally travelling around and complete in the chaos that we've just been talking about. But I really enjoy the kind of the network of thought, and just being able to try and make kind of connections between lots of different things that you throw at us. So some of it I get, some of it I don't get, but I don't worry about that. I just find it really really stimulating. And I also find, like, I mean, I won't be able to get all of them, but listening to different things, they're all connected, really, obviously. So I like the fact that you repeat ideas again and again, and they gradually start to kind of form something that I can make sense of. So I find it really stimulating. I don't sort of have specific questions. Sometimes I have something I want to say, but I'm doing something else, like cooking a dinner or something weird. So yeah, no, it's I've been teaching all day, and I'm just sort of enjoying my head. But so I'm sort of here. I don't put my camera on myself, so I know that it's a bit probably be distracting. But yeah, and I liked what you were saying about sort of undermining the kind of dominance of Western modernity and modernism. I kind of like that. I tell you what, I would like to. You often speak to the East. I'm just wondering if you've got perhaps more you can bring from the African continent, because it is rather from the African continent.
Yeah.
You know, you bring
I was
a lot
listening to African music before this. I was going to play some African music, so I'm not.
Yeah, but you know, art and architecture. I mean, there's so much. Like, you know, you mentioned Greece, but of course, you know, preceding Greece is Egypt, and I just think it'd be really interesting to look at. I mean, obviously, as a continent, it's, I suppose, the most neglected, isn't it, in terms of respecting the traditions of philosophy or art, or giving it a real sense of its history. So it would be great. I don't know whether there's more that can be brought in from that, you know, just I know when I was very young, I went to the Zimbabwe ruins, or I travelled around Nigeria in about 91 and went to visit a lot of artists. And I just think there's probably just so much that we just don't really know about, you know what I mean? But I do appreciate the kind of that decentering of that Western tradition. Also, I really appreciate this much longer view, historic view, and also the reflections on kind of what our kind of moment is now. I find that really, because we do feel like we're just like in this incredible moment, really. Probably, we're on the verge of massive destruction, but potentially also there's so many other things that could come out. So I find it all very helpful. Yeah.
Fraser, you got a light on.
Hey,
Hi.
I totally agree. It was a pleasure to listen again. And I kept thinking about the diagrammatic multiplicity. I was very interested in the combination of the two terms. And then the relation between the chaos and the potential of the blind and mute, and then in relation to the logical might be related to each other, the two points. Would you like to say a little bit more about the diagrammatic multiplicity?
About the diagrammatic what? Multiplicity. Well, the diagram is always several things at the same time. It's never singular. And it always understands that with, let's say, for instance, with memory comes also oblivion. So it enacts rather than making dualistic the relationship between blind and seeing, it takes them as one, as a kind of loop between a polarity which is in constant motion, or forgetting and remembering, or the different temporalities as being together. Guattari talked about, who worked with Deleuze, talked about the unconscious. He said instead of seeing the unconscious as reacting and enacting the past, why not the unconscious anticipating the future yet to come? So he turned around the diagrammatics of the unconscious in relationship to temporality. So I think we're in this period of paradox of understanding temporality in a new way, where suddenly the common sense about temporality is reversed. A bit like the reversal of the relationship of magic and techne in Federico Campagna's book. So the gestalt changes. So what's background and what's foreground suddenly changes. Opens out to a new way of describing space and time, and material interaction, and machineries of attraction, and don't know if that answers it. It's as good as I can answer it though at this moment. When I set out to do it, it's like there's a PowerPoint is like a diagram. It's like a open-ended cipher for discussion. It's provisional. It's just to stimulate the possibility of being able to think something, and to be with something, and to see something which you haven't seen before. It's also relentless and boring and trivial, and so it has a lot of traits which are both positive and negative. But but it's a starting point for something. It's a jumping off point for tomorrow's relationship to what you do in the studio, or what you do with a tutorial, or whatever you do in life.
Yeah, that was helpful. Yeah, I get that. Thank you.
We've almost done 2 hours. I didn't. I've not got a list of fragments of music or today. Maybe next week I'll just get a playlist. Can be DJ again. My pleasure, as it were. Last question.
I'll throw in a last question. So how does it feel to have your birthday today, Jonathan? So happy birthday.
I've forgotten about it already. It didn't quite. I didn't celebrate it, but I've enjoyed being here tonight.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
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 Happy birthday.
It's been a happy birthday now. So next week we meet again. I think it's on errancy. I seem to remember it's errancy, and then the eroticism. And I'll in 2 weeks' time I'll do a meditation to begin with, which has a special relationship to the erotic. So it's a practice, kind of meeting point between mind and body. So I don't know whether I'll start with a meditation or end with one. Anyone last point? Your last chance? I'll stay behind. I'll let you sign off, and if anyone's got